Hey, it's me. We're joined by a very accomplished and innovative filmmaker. Michael Bonfiglio is an Emmy-nominated director, producer, writer, and camera operator. He has directed or co-directed a number of documentaries and television specials. In the world of music, May It Last, a portrait of the Avett brothers. 9 Days and Nights of Ed Sheeran. In the world of sports, there's Doc and Darryl about baseball players Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. And You Don't Know Bo, the legend of Bo Jackson. He also directed Jerry Before Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld's first comedy special in more than a decade. Most recently, Michael Bonfiglio was director of one iconic late-night television host's return to the screen, the streaming Netflix original, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction with David Letterman. It's a great pleasure we welcome this versatile creator in the world of cinema. Michael Bonfiglio, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
All right.
A very, very kind intro.
You have a lot of accolades.
I don't know if it's that many accolades. I've gotten a couple of nominations for things, and we won an award for the Avett Brothers film at South by Southwest. But I've been incredibly fortunate to get to work on a lot of just very interesting projects that have kept me busy, and it's been really fun so far. Yeah.
Would it be correct to assume that you're a man with a lot of interests?
That would be correct. Yeah. I think my interests sort of run the gamut of all kinds of different things. And I think when I get involved in a project, a lot of times it's actually fun to not know anything about the topic. That doesn't always happen. But when it does, I find that sometimes actually helps the project itself, because I need to be learning about it while I'm creating something. And so that can actually be beneficial, I think, in a lot of ways.
So when you decide to undertake a project, you maybe don't research as much.
Well, I do once we're in it. I do quite a bit of research. And so what I guess what I was gathering, what it was getting at is, for example, with the Bo Jackson film, I didn't know much about Bo. I'm not really a sports guy. I remembered him as a kid as the guy who played two sports and had a TV or a Saturday morning cartoon, and the Nike commercials and whatnot. But I didn't know much about him or about his career specifically. And so I think as I did research while making the film, I think that excitement about discovering something new kind of translated to the film. And I think that can sometimes be beneficial to a project. But I definitely do a lot of research, yeah.
Well, let's talk about that one for a second. You Don't Know Bo, the legend of Bo Jackson, because I just finished watching it.
Uh-huh. Did you like it?
I liked it a lot. And,
thanks.
You probably had a few people say this. It felt very different from most sports documentaries.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Did people say that?
They do. I don't know if different is so much, but I think overall it got a really positive response. I think people really enjoyed it. I think people who are my age and older enjoyed the sort of nostalgic factor. And I think the younger generation really got excited about discovering this person, that why didn't they know who he was? But I think what we tried to do with that film was just to make something that was less concerned with the factual reality of Bo Jackson and more about how Bo Jackson existed in our collective imaginations. And that was a decision that I made early on. And I think it was because that was the thing that people responded to so much about him, the way that he inspired our imaginations, that anything was possible. And so I wanted the film to reflect that kind of excitement. And in general, I think people really seem to enjoy it.
You walk away thinking that the word legend is totally improper.
Yeah. I think that was part of the initial decision, was let's make the film about the legend rather than the actuality, even though, everything in it is factually correct. But there are a number of things in the film where people say, oh, I heard this crazy story about him. And we don't know if it's true or not. But there's some fun in imagining that it is true.
Tell us a little bit about the one about Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden.
Yeah, that was a film that Judd Apatow and I did together. It was a 30 for 30 documentary. I had done the Bo Jackson one, which was also for 30 for 30 for ESPN, and had a really good experience doing that. And Judd and I had already, I think we had already started work on the Avett Brothers film. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, let's do a 30 for 30 together." And I said, "Great, let's do one. Do you have any ideas?" He was like, "What about Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden?" I said, "That sounds fantastic." Again, not being a big sports fan, I knew those guys from all of their off the field antics. And it just sounded like a fascinating story. And so we called ESPN and they said, if you can get those guys on board, meaning Doc and Darryl, then we're in. So we were able to do that. So that, yeah, it was, I like to think of it as sort of the opposite side of the coin of Bo Jackson. The Bo film was so positive and almost this idealized version of what a human being is capable of. And Doc and Darryl is a much darker story about so many of the negative things that human beings are capable of. And so they're not, I don't think of them as companion pieces, but it was interesting to make another sports film for the same outlet, but that was just so completely different in terms of the story and in terms of the approach that we took. So yeah, so it was a very interesting project to be involved in.
Might be a hard question, but what would you say has always been the purpose of the art that you are creating?
That's a really great and hard question. I think it varies. I think, for in documentary films, if you look through the history of it, it has changed quite a bit, and there are still people in different camps that adhere to various purity levels, should we say, about documentary. But I think that starting about maybe 20 years ago, I guess it's a little longer ago than that now, but Errol Morris with The Thin Blue Line really pushed the envelope in terms of what documentary could be. And then that was continued with probably my favorite documentary of all time, Brothers Keeper by Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, who were mentors of mine. The idea of telling the factual truth, but imbuing it with more of a narrative storytelling quality. I think up until that period, a documentary had become kind of dry. Not that there weren't exceptions to the rule. I think Sherman's March is one that comes to mind. There are many, but there was a trend that started, I guess, probably in the late 80s, early 90s, that documentaries could be more entertaining and could be more could break the rules and create their own rules. And I think we're seeing a lot of great work now. And for me personally, when I take on a project, I like to kind of find a form that seems to fit the subject matter. There's a certain number of tools that you have, and frequently, if not always, budget is a concern. Documentaries don't tend to have very big budgets, so you have to kind of work within your means. But I think I'm straying from your initial question, which was a hard one. But I don't know if there's any particular through line in the work that I've done, but yeah, again, I like to seek out interesting projects, things that interest me, that I'm curious about, that I want to know more about, and try and tell the stories in interesting ways that hopefully people will respond to.
Would you say that you've had a greatest teacher in filmmaking or documentaries?
I've been incredibly fortunate, and I've had a few. I previously mentioned Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, who were my mentors. I started working for them. I was their intern when I was in college, and then I dropped out of college to work for them full time. And so they taught me a tremendous amount. And then, more recently, in the past few years, sort of an unlikely source of learning, given that he didn't have documentary experience, but Judd Apatow, who I've made a couple of films with. Judd is just an incredible teacher. And even though I think he initially viewed our relationship as he was new to documentary and I had done a lot of work. So I think he was sort of coming in with the mentality of he's the one who doesn't know how to do this, but he's so brilliant. And I learned so much from him just about storytelling in general. And so the technical ideas of documentary are really minor, I think, when it comes to somebody, like Judd, who's so brilliant in so many ways. But I've been incredibly fortunate and been able to have a whole lot of teachers. And you also learn things from your subjects too, like when you're working with somebody, and learning to always be open to what is actually in front of you, as opposed to what maybe your preconceived notions might have been going in, and allowing the final piece to reflect that, and not get your own prejudices and ideas too far ahead of what's actually happening.
This might also be considered, I guess, a difficult question, but of the films that you've directed or co-directed, if you had to pick one to represent what you do, you had some way to present it to Earth, which one would you do?
The Avett Brothers film, May It Last, is my favorite thing that I've done. It's the thing I think I'm most proud of. I think it's the thing that reflects who I would like to be, and reflects my values, I think, the most. I'm incredibly proud of that film. It took us a long time to do it, and every moment of it was just pure joy. And it's certainly the thing that I'm most proud of, and I think is most reflective of the things that I want to say. And I'm repeating myself, but the values that I think are important. So I would definitely say May It Last. Yeah.
It sounds like that was a kind of life-changing movie for you to make.
It was. Judd and I started it back in, and for people who haven't seen it, which is probably a lot of people because it's not like some huge movie, but it's on HBO now. But it's a film about the band the Avett Brothers, who are a band from North Carolina that started with two brothers, and they brought in their bass player Bob Crawford, and the band kind of grew. And the film tells their sort of the band history, but it's primarily a present day narrative of them working on their new album and sort of the life that is happening, around them. And so it's currently streaming on HBO, so you can see it there. But it was just, again, it was such a positive experience all around. Judd and I started making the film he called me in November of 2013. And he and I had been talking about doing something together. And he said, I got a call from Rick Rubin, and the Avett Brothers are going to the studio, and we could film probably if we wanted to. And do you want to go check it out? I said, yeah, of course, let's do it. So we started off, we didn't know what we were making. We had talked about maybe doing some type of a series, profiling different artists, and maybe this could be a pilot. But we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't know if we were just going to do one shoot to explore and see if there was something there. Judd just paid for it himself. I worked for free, and we just did it as small and budget conscious as possible. And it was just very low key, and it kind of continued like that the entire time. We did a first shoot and said, there's something about these guys, and the music is amazing, and there's just something about them that's very special. And we don't know what it is. We don't know what this thing is that we're making, if we're actually even making something. We really had no idea. And it just kind of grew very naturally that, every couple of months or so we'd go back and film more. And it was sort of like, what is this thing? We don't know what it is, but there's something here. We need to just keep doing it. And eventually we decided this is a feature documentary. And just, again, every moment of it was just so pleasurable in every way. From the very first shoot through the editing and the way it was received by the public. And I feel like, it's one of those rare instances where filmmakers and subjects just completely click well, and we all kind of just had a very similar sensibility, or there was just a kinship there, I think, artistically and in every other way. And I think the film kind of reflects that. So I'm incredibly proud of it. It's I would urge everybody to see it if you're interested.
We're talking with director Michael Bonfiglio, and you're going to have to excuse me because when I was watching this series, My Next Guest with David Letterman, I super analyzed it. I'm talking like, there we go. like taking
Wow.
notes.
Okay. Paul was holding up a notebook that is covered in notes.
Yeah. Well, how did you come to direct this television series for David Letterman?
Well, I got very lucky. I worked with a company called Radical Media who had been developing the series with Dave, and I was aware that they were developing it, and I just made it known to everyone there who had any power in anything. I just begged to please let me be involved somehow, because I think Dave is just one of the greatest ever. And I had done Jerry Seinfeld's stand-up special. And so I think there were two things that I think gave Dave the confidence in me to do it. He saw a documentary that I did called From the Ashes about the coal industry. And Dave is a very passionate environmentalist, and he saw that film and really liked it. And then I did Jerry's special, Jerry Before Seinfeld. And so, again, the guy who did an environmental documentary seems like a weird choice to work with Dave on his new talk show. But, I didn't get to make the decision. So then I did Jerry's special. So it was clear that I could work with comedy as well as serious issues, I guess. And so, Radical Media, Justin Wilkes over there, recommended me for the job, and I met with Dave, and he said, "Okay, cool." And so I had the gig. It was kind of surreal, to think about. First of all, Dave coming back to television at all. I mean, as we all, when we watched, the last episode, it was like, are we ever going to see him again? Is he going to pull a Johnny Carson? Will we ever get more Dave? And then to know that, he's doing a show, and oh my God, I get to work on it, was surreal is probably the right word. Yeah.
I got to interview the comedian Tom Dreesen, and he said, if you like David Letterman, get a good look now, because you're never going to see him again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we all thought.
Yeah.
But, he's still extremely energetic and extremely curious, and, decided to do another show. And so I think I'm very proud of the show. I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are. But I mean, just having Dave back is I think a good thing for the world.
Yeah, I have to agree. Well, I liked it again. Going back to that word, different, being different. Yeah. This was a series where you had the star, but then you got to meet someone either in some way having to do with or related to that person, or like a behind-the-scenes guy, which in many cases can be just as interesting. Mm-hmm. You don't get that on most talk shows.
Yeah. I think the goal of the show, Dave did his shows for 35 years, and he did late night talk better than anyone in the history of the medium before or since. And he wasn't interested in doing that again. He wanted to do something different. And he wanted to, the things that he said he wanted to do were, talk to a guest in a long format in front of an audience, because he enjoys doing that. And he wanted to also go out on these adventures and have other experiences, bring the audience to other experiences. And we, that was kind of the mandate. And so, we all collectively came up with this show and this approach. It's not perfect, but, we did 6 episodes. And we like to think of it, often one of the producers and I, Aaron Bergeron, would say to each other, when the third one, after finishing the 3rd episode, would say, well, it's only Wednesday. If you think about a talk show schedule, this thing is just starting. So, we did treat each of them sort of as specials, but then it was, it's a sort of an odd setup, because we were shooting them as we were editing them, and we didn't have that turnaround of, it's going to be on tonight. It was a much longer gestation period for each episode. But the release schedule once a month was a little unusual. I don't think that had been done before. So it's kind of a show that I think some people were expecting more of late night or the Late Show or something like that, and we gave people this, and I'm proud of it. I think we tried some things that we didn't know if they were going to work, and I hope they did. But yeah, I think I'm super curious to hear what you think of it, because I know that you're a big Letterman fan, and clearly you watched the new series very intently. What did you think?
I liked it very, very much. First of all, let's get that out of the way. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Cool. Yeah.
There have been a lot of people who've said that they thought that the camera angles were, like, either people said they didn't like it or they said it was distracting. Yeah. I did not notice that at all. I didn't notice that at all. I thought what I liked so much about it was, one, each episode, it was, okay, you're learning about this person, but we also always learned a little something about Dave as well. Yes. And then at the end, which was never really a part of David Letterman, there was like, wow, here's a universal question. Like, what does this have to do with our place in the world? Wow, who would have ever thought David Letterman, would be posing questions like these? Or, there's really big issues in these.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that we were all excited about, was having this new format that is, it's not much of a format. It's a very minimalist kind of a show, and that it could really be about whatever Dave wanted to talk about. And Dave is a incredibly intelligent person who is very engaged in the issues of the world, and is a very, interested and passionate guy about a lot of different issues. And, I think, to me as a fan of Dave, I liked getting to know more about him. I liked getting to know more about what he's interested in and things that he thought were important. We only did 6 shows, so there's a million topics that we didn't address. But yeah, I'm very appreciative. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I feel like the show got some mixed reactions. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I saw a lot of things on social media about the camera angles that, and if I can just sort of defend or explain that decision, it was all part of not wanting this to look like the old show, not wanting it to look like other talk shows. And I like the way the show looks personally. I mean, that's just sort of an aesthetic, taste question. But, if you have, the show is largely 2 people sitting in chairs on a stage for a long time, which is, there's not a whole lot to work with visually. So we tried to shoot it in a way that would hopefully be compelling and engage viewers, and not be a traditional talk show, shooting method. So I personally like it. I know that some people don't, but what can I say? But I think that one of the things that I do like about the show is that it is very much of Dave. I think that to look at it as, oh, this is a show about the guest, is maybe the wrong way to look at it. This is Dave's show, and he's talking about the things that he wants to talk about. And that to me is interesting, because I like Dave, So, I always assumed that the main audience for the show was people who are interested in Dave and what he has to say, what he wants to talk about. So that was kind of the approach.
Were there any ideas that Dave had, or anybody for that matter, that had to be adjusted, that had to be tweaked a bit?
That's a good question. Well, probably. Nothing's immediately coming to mind. Again, having only done 6 of them, I mean, there were certainly ideas that came up that we didn't end up doing. It was very limited. It was 6 shows, 6 guests, and within each one, we would go out into the field, and the decision making on that varied. If you look across the series, the field pieces function in very different ways within the show. For example, with the Malala episode, we went in the field with Malala. That was the only one really where we did that, where we went out with the guest. One of the things that Dave had said early on was that he missed having music and being around live music every night like he had with Paul Schaefer. And, music is a traditional component of talk shows. And so we tried to present music. We had 2 episodes where we had live music, and each presented in very different ways, I think, than we've seen in talk shows in the past. And I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was kind of neat to have musical guests, but not, ladies and gentlemen, here's so-and-so, but to go out into the world and find the music where it is. I really enjoyed that part of the show. And, and then for example, the episode with President Obama and John Lewis, those were 2 stories that were linked thematically. So we approached the field pieces in different ways, and hopefully people went with what we were trying to do. I think, there was certainly some experimentation, and, not everything can work every time, but I'm actually really pleased with how all of it came out. And so, yeah, I think it's a sort of a weird show, but Dave's kind of weird. And so I don't know. I'm proud of the show.
Well, just to list the different guests for the listeners out there, you all had on Barack Obama, George Clooney, here comes the tough one, Malala Yousafzai, thank you,
yeah.
Jay-Z, Tina Fey, and Howard Stern. Yes. Did you have a favorite episode?
Oh, that's a good question. Favorite episode to work on would probably have been the one with President Obama and Congressman Lewis, because that was just who gets to meet those people and who gets to do that. It was such an honor and a thrill. I had actually had the great privilege of interviewing Representative Lewis about 9 months before for a series called Oprah's Masterclass that I've directed for many years, and got to sit down and interview him for about 2 hours. And it was an incredible experience. So then to get to work with him not only once, but twice, and to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with him and with Dave was just an extraordinary life experience. And getting to meet the president was it was amazing. It was just a really, really cool experience. So my favorite one to work on was that one. The episode that I probably like the best would either be that, or I think maybe the Jay-Z episode. I really liked the conversation that they had. I thought it was fascinating. I thought that they had that Dave and Jay had a very interesting dynamic between them, and an interesting rapport, and kind of went on a journey together throughout their conversation that I think the show reflects. And I was really proud of how we integrated music into that one. I thought it was very cool. It was some people didn't like it. Some people loved it. I'm in the camp of I really liked it. So yeah, probably those 2. But I really, there were things about each one that I really enjoyed. So yeah, hard to pick favorites, but yeah, that would be my answer.
Was there any thought that went into the sequencing of the episodes, or was that just done, in order?
Yeah, there was. Some of it was just based on scheduling and availability of people. But we actually shot the George Clooney episode before we shot the Obama episode, but the Obama episode aired first. So we, having never made one of these before, I think, Dave and George know each other fairly well. And I think that was sort of an easier conversation for Dave to be prepared for. So I think there was a desire to get one fully shot before Dave sits down with the president for an hour and a half, and that's a pretty high pressure seat to be in. Although you can't tell from watching Dave, but what he does on that stage is pretty extraordinary. I've never seen anyone else do anything like it. So we shot the Clooney episode first, and actually had edited that one almost completely before we shot the Obama episode. And we sort of treated the Clooney episode as the pilot to try and figure out, okay, how does this all work? And so we had a clear sense of what we were doing by the time we shot the Obama episode. But the Obama episode actually aired first. And then after that, the sequence of shows was really just sort of based on the booking of the guests and the order that we shot them in. So the first two were flip-flopped. And then after that, I'm pretty sure the order was the order that we shot them in.
On the episode with Howard Stern, he raised the question of, well, Dave, what if there had been no audience here? What if you had done something, more intimate? Yeah. What did you think about that? Would you have preferred to do something more, like in a studio with just the two guests, or did you like the audience?
I liked the audience. The audience was definitely came directly from Dave. I think, the energy of the audience is something that he likes. And, I kind of looked at it as we did get to do those more intimate interviews when out in the field, when Dave is walking the bridge with Congressman Lewis, or, spending time with George Clooney's family. That was much more intimate without an audience. So I kind of feel like we were able to get both versions of it. But, having the audience there, I think, it certainly changes. It helps define what the show is in many ways. So I think, I think, the energy of laughter from the audience, applause from the audience, that reaction, I think, can help fuel the conversation. And so it would have been a very, very different show without an audience. I think, Howard does his show without an audience, and that's where he's comfortable and he likes doing it that way. So that's where I think that comment to me was coming from, is like, oh, he likes it that way. Well, Dave likes an audience. I thought that was like kind of an interesting moment. These two, legendary broadcasters with such different takes on on how they do their job. Howard's a brilliant interviewer, but I don't know, it's a question, would he be able to do the interviews that he does on his show in front of a live audience? Maybe not. I don't know. And maybe Dave wouldn't be as good doing what he does without the audience. But that was having the audience there was something that Dave wanted. That was part of his vision for the show.
That's really interesting what you brought up there, that it kind of shows the two tastes, and they both were able to get different things out of people, but by different techniques. Completely. Yeah. Which was a cool thing to see, because there arguably are not better interviewers out there than those two people, and yet they get what they get in very different ways. Yeah, that's what occurred to me too when I was watching that one. I thought, you said the word legends, and I would say that too, but I thought, wow, these are the two giants of broadcasting.
Yeah.
Dave of television, Howard of radio, on one stage. It felt like a different episode to me from the others.
Yeah, well, I think that they're, and it's funny, like the thing I haven't seen anybody mention, but I don't know if you remember at the very beginning of the episode, we show a clip from I think 1983 of Howard on Late Night. And at the end of the clip, he says, I'd like to come back. I want to be a regular on your show. These guys have this relationship, this on-air relationship that spans decades. And so they've, I don't know how many times Howard was on Dave's old shows, but they have a unique rapport. I think they have a lot of they share a lot of qualities. They're very different in some ways, and I think very similar in other ways. Again, this is my outside observation. I met Howard once, and I've worked with Dave, but I can't say that I know him intimately. But I think they're two people who have a lot of similarities that are huge and a lot of differences that are huge. And to see them together, it's just a very cool thing. And I think, even when Dave has been on Howard's show, which is great, and, they have the camera in there, I think there's a different energy to it when they're on a stage in front of people and being able to have the freedom to talk for a really long time. It was a very cool thing to be able to witness and then to, help put together and bring to an audience.
Something that I also noticed a few times in this series was that Dave David Letterman, he really resisted when the guest in any way tried to turn the tables. Like, you kind of saw him putting on the brakes when Obama and George Clooney, when they started to ask him questions, he kind of stiffened up.
Yeah. I think that's his natural inclination. I think that, Dave is a very complex person, and I think he tends to bristle when anyone would suggest that he's interesting. I don't know how much of his sort of reluctance to be asked questions was genuine and how much of it was, joking. But, I know he's a very curious guy, and he likes having these conversations. And he had certainly with the president, he had a lot to ask him. And so, I think he wanted to spend time not talking about himself, but asking questions of Obama. At the same time, though, on the rare occasions when he does talk about himself and his life on the show, like it's incredibly interesting. And we tried to leave, as many of those in as possible, because I think he's just a fascinating person with a lot to say and a lot on his mind. So I felt like, despite his apparent reluctance to sort of answer questions from guests, although I think as it went on, he loosened up about that a little bit. I think you see it in the show that he's a little more willing to do that. But I feel like on this show, you get a stronger sense of Dave than maybe we had in the past on his old shows. It's because it's just sort of a very concentrated version of Dave. And so there were, just a lot of moments across the series that I really like, because they're revealing of Dave. So yeah, I don't know how, he always wanted the show to be a conversation. And I think he genuinely did that, but I also think that, part of it is just him being self-deprecating. I think that may be where some of that reluctance to sort of answer questions or, turn the tables on him a little bit may have come from, but I can only speculate.
What would you say surprised you the most that you learned as a result of doing this, My Next Guest with David Letterman?
I'd never done a talk show before, and this is kind of a weird talk show. Again, our setup was very different from a traditional talk show. It's usually a much larger staff. Usually they have their own studio. We were we didn't have a home base. We were shooting them, many weeks apart. So each time we shot one, it was, creating a whole event and then documenting that event. But, just it gave me a whole new admiration for the people who work on late night talk shows that are on 4 or 5 nights a week. It's just an incredible amount of work that must go into those shows that we kind of take for granted. They're just on. But, I think with our show, we were able to, we didn't have that pressure of being on that night. So it was just a very different, it couldn't have been more different from a normal talk show experience. But I think having now worked on a talk show, a version of a talk show, it brought for me an even deeper respect for the people who are, churning out work every single night. That again, I think we all kind of take for granted how much work goes into those shows.
Now, here's the question that a lot of people are wondering.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be a second season of My Next Guest with David Letterman?
I don't know. That's as much as I can say. I don't know. I hope there is. I hope there is. Yeah. But I don't know.
Now, being that you've said you don't know,
mm-hmm.
just you personally,
mm-hmm.
if you did a second season, who would you most like to see sitting in the other seat?
That's a good question, and a fun parlor game. Could I turn around on you? Who would you like to see? And then I'll answer. But
Ooh,
I'm very curious.
Okay, well, I watched your documentary, Jerry Before Seinfeld, and I also saw the bonus thing where Jerry and Dave kind of just chat.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Jerry Seinfeld would be a very interesting guest for David Letterman.
I do too.
Yeah. You know, by the way, I got to compliment you on that documentary as well. I've never seen anybody who was able so seamlessly to put documentary in a stand-up comedy show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool. I liked that one a lot.
Thanks a lot. That was a lot of fun to do. Jerry's just fantastic to work with, and it was just an incredible privilege to get to work with him. And we wanted to do something different. When we started that, Jerry he wanted to revisit this old material, but he said, I don't want to just do the material. I want to do something more. And so we came up with what we ended up making. And it was really just a lot of fun to do. And I learned tons from Jerry. What an incredibly, not only smart, but he's just a master craftsman. And I learned so much from him and had a great time working on that. I don't want to dodge your other question. I'm happy to talk about Jerry Before Seinfeld. There are a lot of people I'd love to see. I would love to see Dave sit down with the Pope. I'd love to see him sit down with Trump. I'd love to see him sit down with Angela Merkel. I'd like to see him with Bill Murray. Mm-hmm. There's a huge list of people that I'd like to see him talk to. LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, Steve Martin. There's a ton of people. So if there were to be more, obviously there's no end to the number of, or to the the list of interesting guests that he could have. I mean, I like, one thing that I think is kind of cool about the show is being able to alternate between a guest like Malala Yousafzai and Howard Stern, and Dave's ability to talk about serious things and have fun and be funny with serious guests and guests that are also funny. So I think it's the possibilities for guests are certainly endless.
I'm just pulling up a message. I was talking to Elizabeth Cook, who is one of the musicians that Dave is friends with and a big fan of. Uh-huh. And I was asking her, just because she always keeps up with Letterman, I said, what do you think of it? And she knew what I meant, the Netflix show. Uh-huh. And she said, love. Intelligent, classy, restrained, and thoughtful. And so, I gotta say, I just wanted to slip that in there. But
thank you, Elizabeth. That's very nice.
Yeah. But Dave is such a music fan, and one of the cool things about the last episodes was he was really showing us his musical tastes, which were really top notch. Yeah. Another thing I would add to what I would like to see, even if it was just one of the musical interludes, and even if they just did like a fist bump, it would be cool if he went backstage at a Bob Dylan concert.
That would be very cool.
Yeah. Even if it was just cool. Like, hey, man, I'd like to see that. I
would too. That would be amazing. Yeah. What did you think of the music on the show? And we had Buddy Guy and we had Madison Ward and Lucas Nelson. And what did you think of how the music was handled on the show?
Well, I'm kind of a sentimental kind of guy. And the selections of songs, they kind of left you a little misty-eyed. Yeah. The duet of Lucas Nelson and Madison Ward. I mean, it's just one of those things that filled your heart up. The Buddy Guy song, I mean, it's really tough to say which one I liked more of those two. They're both meaningful songs. I loved the little musical, asides.
Cool, me too. I really like them too. Yeah. I don't know if they worked for everyone, but nothing's ever going to work for everyone. But I really like them, and it was one of the things that I was really kind of proud of with the show that we were able to do. Is like, let's get music on a talk show, which is not an unusual thing to do. That's a very normal thing for talk shows to have. But let's try and do it in a different way. And I feel like we kind of succeeded. I didn't hear a lot of feedback from people about it. So I was just curious, what your thought was, because I was sort of like, oh, this is really neat, But yeah,
and it was also kind of behind the scenes in these cases, in that it wasn't like you said, they're booking a musical guest. It was like the thing in the studio. It was just like, wow, we're getting a window into this thing.
Yeah, that was all completely real.
Yeah.
So that was pretty neat. I mean, the end to that was Rick Rubin. Dave was interested in Rick, and so that's how that happened. But it was like, oh, here's a window, a way to bring music onto the show that's different, that's sort of unexpected, and to present it in a different way, less as a performance and more of just kind of being there with it.
Not just with My Next Guest Needs No Introduction with David Letterman, but just all of the things you've done. You've gotten the chance to meet people that most people would never get a chance to meet. You've gotten the chance to go to places, see things, just a lot of very interesting experiences. What would you say meeting these different people, going to these places, has done for the way that you see the world?
Oh, that's a great question. It's something. It kind of boggles my mind when I think about all of the people I've gotten to meet and places I've gotten to go. I'm so unbelievably lucky, and there's no explanation for it. So I just try and be grateful for it. But I've taken things away from so many experiences with so many people. You always, when you find yourself with someone you admire, and even sometimes with people you don't admire, I think you try to take in as much as you can and to learn as much as you can from that experience. And most of the time, it's all good things. Sometimes it's how not to behave, but usually it's all positive things. And it can, someone like John Lewis, for example. I mean, you can't spend 5 seconds in that guy's presence without being inspired and feeling like, my God, what have I done with my life? And I've just been incredibly fortunate. It's hard to say specific concrete things that I've learned in general from all of these experiences, but I think probably the biggest one is just to be grateful for the opportunity to have had those experiences, to learn from people who I admire and who I think are tremendously talented and doing interesting things with their lives.
What would you say is the best thing about being Michael Bonfiglio?
Probably my wonderful wife. That's a pretty great thing about being me. Yeah.
Well, you have a unique opportunity here in that you get to say whatever you want to the audience. I always like to end my interviews. I just give the guest the stage. I let them take the microphone. You can go anywhere you want.
Anywhere I want. Oh man, that's so much pressure, Paul. Oh boy, I'm going to disappoint you and your listeners now because I didn't prepare anything, and I guess vote in the fall. Please vote, and if you have a special election in your state, vote, because the way that things are going in the world right now, I think we really need to take some serious action to change the course of events. I think we're living in a time that is, I think every generation thinks that their particular time is unique, and that's true to some extent. But I really think that we're living in a time that's incredibly scary and dangerous in ways that are probably unprecedented. Certainly, if you think about climate change, that is historically unprecedented, at least in terms of human existence. And just every day reading the paper and seeing all of these things that are being done in our names as Americans, separating children from their parents at the border, and it's overwhelming, the amount of negative things and scary things that are happening. But we can change it. We live in a democracy, and if we vote, we can change it. So I hope that everyone gets out and votes in November. So I guess that would be my main message.
Well, my last question on this episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. At the beginning of the show, I listed all of these titles that have been applied to you. Mm-hmm. director, writer, producer. How would you define who you are? Who is Michael Bonfiglio?
Man, you have the hardest questions, Paul. Jeez, I like to think that I'm somebody who has some small amount of talent at shining a light on other people and their stories, and helping tell those stories in ways that are entertaining and engaging for people, and that offer some type of usually positivity into the world, and hopefully encourage everyone to be nicer to each other. That sounds so corny. I don't know. I'm a terrible guest, man.
No, no, absolutely not. I talk to a lot of people, and you're not in the bad or terrible category.
Okay.
Well, you said, be nice to people, and those are the kinds of messages that don't go away, and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for letting us in.
Thank you, Paul. This was such an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. Really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it. Pleasure was mine.
Take care.
All right, till next time.
All right, man. So long.